A Russian countess stepped down from the stagecoach at Granite, Colorado on the 29th of September, 1879, in a dove-gray silk traveling dress that no one in that valley had ever seen. And within the hour, the most powerful cattle baron in the upper Arkansas had offered to buy her land for half what he knew it was worth. He had a reason to be in a hurry. So did she. Neither of them knew it yet, but the whole of the next 6 months would turn on a hole in the ground, 840 acres of grass, and a date in a county book that a dead man could not have written. Her name, on the deed she carried folded in a leather wallet against her ribs, was Alexandra Voronova. In Petersburg, she had been Alexandra Mikhailovna, the Countess Voronova, and there had been a house on the English embankment with 40 windows facing the Neva, and a father who owned 11,000 desyatins of black earth in Tambov province, and an income that arrived 4 times a year without anyone having to lift a hand to earn it. All of it was gone. Her father had put the last of the family into railway shares that were never built, died in a Wiesbaden hotel owing a German bank, and left her one choice that was not marriage to one of his creditors: to run. She had run as far as the money would carry her, which was here. Here was 840 acres above the Arkansas River, bought sight unseen from a land agent in New York for $1,100, $600 paid, and the rest still owing. She had $410 American left in a money belt and a signet ring with the Voronov arms she would not sell. She had bought the place for one reason printed on the agent's list. It came with water. In a valley going mad for silver, where they said a single egg cost more up at the Leadville diggings than a working man earned in an hour, water that did not fail in August was worth more than silver, and exactly one man in the upper valley understood that as well as she was about to. Cornelius Sterrett of the Bar S, whose range surrounded her 840 acres on 3 sides like a horseshoe round a nail, and whose man was waiting for her on the platform with a soft smile and a low offer. She was 34 years old. She had a long neck and a broad forehead and pale grey eyes set wide apart, and the men on the platform looked at her the way men look at a thing they cannot price. There were 3 of them. 2 were waiting on freight. The third was waiting on her. The deed in her wallet said she would rather be poor on her own land than poor in someone else's drawing room. She was about to find out what that cost. The third man on the platform took off his hat. He did it badly, the way a man does a thing he has seen done but never practiced, and he said, "You'd be the Russian lady? Come for the Halloran place." She had learned in 4 months of America that the correct answer to most questions was no answer at all, and that silence was read here not as rudeness but as strength, which was a useful thing to know, and not at all how it worked in Petersburg, where silence was read as either grief or arrogance, and both were punished. So she looked at him and waited. He was perhaps 50. He had a soft belly under a good waistcoat and pale hands and a signet ring of his own, a cheap one, and his boots were expensive and had never once been broken in, and he had a way of standing with his weight back on his heels that she had seen before, in Petersburg, in men who collected debts. His name was Pruitt. He was, he explained, agent for Mr. Sterrett, Cornelius Sterrett of the Bar S, the largest cattle operation in the Upper Valley, the same name she had heard spoken at the railhead, with the particular flatness men use for a thing they fear and depend upon at once. "Mr. Sterrett," he said, "wanted me to make you an offer before you go to the trouble of riding out. Save you the disappointment. It's a hard piece of ground, ma'am, and there's no house left worth the name, and the well's gone bad, and a lady on her own. He let that hang and smiled, and his teeth were the teeth of a man who drank. "Mr. Sterrett will give you $900 for the deed, cash, today, and you can take the evening coach back toward Denver and sleep in a hotel tonight instead of in a sod ruin." $900. She had paid $1,100 and owed $5 of it still. She did the arithmetic without moving her face, because she had been doing arithmetic without moving her face since she was 19 years old, and her mother had taught her that a woman who lets a man see her count has already lost. $900 would not even clear the New York note. It was not an offer. It was the opening move of a man who had already decided the thing was his and was only haggling with himself over how little he could pay. "Thank you," she said. Her English was correct and slow and accented, and the accent was not the French accent these men half expected from a foreign lady, but something heavier and more Eastern, and she watched Pruitt try to place it and fail. "I will go and look at it first." "Ma'am, there's nothing to look at." "Then I will not be long." She had been in America 4 months, and she had learned that an American man could not bear to be answered briefly and pleasantly, that it left him with nowhere to put his next sentence. Pruitt's smile stayed, but his eyes changed. He put his hat back on. "Suit yourself," he said. "Offer's good till sundown. After that—" He shrugged, and the shrug said, "After that the price goes down, and we both know it, and you'll come back." There was a man standing at the far end of the platform by the freight scale who had not moved during any of this. He was not one of Pruitt's men. He stood apart from them the way a working horse stands apart from a coach team. He was younger than Pruitt, lean, in a canvas coat gone the color of the road, and he had a wide hat pulled low, and he was doing nothing at all except watching the valley, or seeming to, with the particular stillness of a man who can watch one thing and see another. When Pruitt walked off toward the freight office, this man crossed the platform, unhurried, and stopped a polite distance from her trunks. "Halloran's is 7 miles, he said. He did not take off his hat, and somehow this was more respectful than Pruitt taking off his, because Pruitt had done it for himself, and this man simply went on as if hats were not the point. "Road's washed out at the second crossing. You'll want to go up the east bench. There's a hired rig at the livery. Dietz keeps it, but he'll charge you the moon if Pruitt's already been to see him, and Pruitt's already been to see him." "Why," she said, "would Mr. Pruitt go to see the man with the rig?" The stranger looked at her then, properly, for the first time, and whatever he had expected, a lady who would cry or flush or ask to be taken back to Denver, it was not the question she had asked. "Because," he said, "the easiest way to buy a man's land cheap is to make sure he can't get to it to find out it's worth more. You hold the road, you hold the price." He paused. "Ma'am?" She considered this. In Tambov, her father had once bought a neighbor's forest for 1/3 of its value by buying first the only sawmill within 40 versts. She had been 12. She had thought it clever and had said so, and her father had said, "No, it is not clever, it is only patient, and patient men are more dangerous than clever ones." She had not understood the difference then. She understood it now. On a railway platform 7,000 versts from Tambov, listening to a stranger in a canvas coat describe Cornelius Sterrett without ever raising his voice. "You know this man Sterrett?" she said. "I worked his roundup 2 seasons. I don't work it now." He said nothing more about that, and she did not ask, and she filed the not asking away as a thing she had done correctly. "I can take you up the east bench. I've a horse, and I've got nothing pressing. I won't charge you the moon. I'll charge you $1, which is fair, and you'll know it's fair because Dietz would have said 3. And why, she said, would you do this for $1, for a woman you have never met, against the interest of a man who employs everyone in this valley? He looked at the mountains for a while. The light was coming down off the high snow already, though it was only September, and the air had the thin, bright cut to it that she would learn meant the valley was 9,000 feet above a sea none of them would ever see.
Halloran was a friend of mine, he said at last.
He built that well himself. It didn't go bad. Somebody put a dead steer down it in April, after he passed, when the place stood empty. I'd like to know it went to somebody who'd dig it out, instead of somebody who poisoned it. He shifted his weight once. That's the whole of it, ma'am. You can take the $1 ride, or you can take Pruitt's 900. But I'd look at the land before I sold it to the man who killed the water. She was quiet. Then she did a thing she had not done since Hamburg, which was to decide to trust someone on no evidence but the set of his shoulders and the fact that he had told her something against his own ease rather than for it. "What is your name?" she said.
Tom Rees.
"Countess Voronova," she said, and then, because the word had no purchase here, and she could feel it sliding off him like water off oilcloth, she added, "Alexandra. The other one does not travel well." "No, ma'am," Tom Rees agreed. "Most things don't, out here. The ones that do, you keep." He carried her trunks himself, one on each shoulder, down the platform steps, and she walked behind him into the thin gold light. And behind her, the evening coach stood waiting, with its team in harness. The coach Pruitt had told her she would be glad to take back toward Denver, and she did not look at it. If you have come to this channel for stories of women who arrived in this country with a ledger in one hand and a deed in the other, and learned to load a revolver only because the law would not load it for them, the small button beneath this video keeps the stories coming. That is the only thing I will ask of you.
The Halloran place was worse than Pruitt had said,
Which she had expected, and better than Pruitt had meant her to believe, which she had also expected because she had grown up among men who lied about land for a living, and she knew that the size of a man's lie told you the size of the thing he wanted. The house was a single room of squared logs with a sod roof that had fallen at one corner, and there was a stove with a cracked firebox and a lean-to that had held tools and now held the wind. But the logs were good, dry lodgepole pine set on a foundation of dressed stone, and the man who had cut that foundation had known what he was doing, and the lean-to was framed square, and 40 paces from the door there was a stone-curbed well with a dead steer in it, and around the well, where the spilled water of years had run, the grass grew thick and green into the last week of September, while everywhere else on the bench it had gone to straw.
"That's the thing,"
Tom Rees said, standing at the well curb, with his hat off now, finally, looking down into the dark. "Water like this in the upper valley, you could run 400 head off it and never want. Sterrett knows it. Sterrett's got the whole East Range, and one spring he has to share with a Mormon outfit at Pleasant Valley, and it goes dry in August. He doesn't want 840 acres of grass. He wants this hole in the ground. He'd give you 900 for the deed, and the water's worth 10 times that to him, and he knows it, and he counted on you not knowing it." Alexandra Voronova stood at the well of a dead man on the far side of the earth from the river of her childhood, and she looked at the green grass that the water had made, and she did the arithmetic, and for the first time since Wiesbaden, the numbers came out on her side. "Then we will dig out the steer," she said.
Tom Rees looked at her.
"It's a 2-day job and an ugly one, ma'am, and the smell. I have buried both my parents and a country," she said. I have smelled worse than a steer." She drew off one grey glove, finger by finger, and looked at her own hand, at the pale band on the third finger where a ring had been until Hamburg. "How much," she said, "to hire a man to help dig? An honest man, at an honest price. I have," she added, and here she allowed herself for the first time the smallest dry pleasure. "Approximately 11 days before Mr. Pruitt returns to discover that I have not gone back to Denver, and I should like the water clean before he does." The light was going off the high peaks now, and the cold came down the valley like a hand laid flat, and somewhere below them, on the washed-out road, a single rider had stopped at the second crossing and sat his horse and looked up at the Halloran place, where there was smoke, for the first time in 5 months, beginning to rise from a cracked firebox against the dark. The rider at the second crossing was named Early, a Bar S man, young, with a new rifle he had not yet learned to stop touching, and he did not come up to the house that first night. He sat his horse in the cold until the smoke from the cracked firebox thinned and went out, and then he turned and rode back down the valley to tell Cornelius Sterrett that the Russian woman had not taken the evening coach, that there was a fire in the Halloran stove, and that Tom Rees's horse had been tied at the rail. Of these 3 facts, it was the third that interested Sterrett. But that was 7 miles away, in a stone house with glass windows and a Chickering piano nobody played, and Alexandra Voronova knew nothing of it. She knew only that the night at 9,000 feet was colder than any night she had known in Petersburg, where the cold was wet and came off the river, and that the firebox would not hold a fire past 2 in the morning because of the crack, and that she lay on a tick of old straw in a borrowed wool blanket and watched her own breath go up toward the broken corner of the roof where she could see one hard, white star. She did not sleep much. She had not slept much since Wiesbaden. She had developed in the year and a half since a habit of using the sleepless hours to count. Not money, there was no point counting money she did not have, but tasks, the way her father's steward had counted tasks aloud on his fingers every morning of her childhood in the estate office that smelled of tallow and the leather of account books. Dig out the well, mend the roof corner before snow, find the honest man. Learn what 840 acres can carry, and at what price beef sold in Leadville, where they said a single egg cost more than a man would credit, because the silver-mad thousands who had come up the gulch in a single year had between them, it seemed, not thought to bring a hen. That last fact she had from Tom Rees, who had told it to her on the ride up the east bench, not as conversation, but as instruction, the way a man tells you the depth of a ford before you put your horse to it. Leadville was the largest thing that had ever happened to this valley. 2 years before, there had been nothing on Carbonate Hill but pines and a few worn-out placer men panning the gulch for the gold that was long gone. And then somebody had thought to look at the heavy black sand that fouled the sluice boxes. And the heavy black sand had turned out to be lead carbonate, riddled with silver. And now there was a city up there of more than 10,000 souls where there had been 40, with an opera house going up and a daily newspaper and streets of mud so deep a mule had drowned in the middle of Harrison Avenue, and every one of those 10,000 souls had to eat. And beef was beef, and a steer that fetched a few dollars on the Kansas railheads fetched many times that at the Leadville slaughter pens, because nobody could get cattle up the last grade in winter. "That's the whole arithmetic of this valley," Tom Rees had said. "Grass down here, hunger up there, and one bad road between. Man who can keep cattle fat through the winter on water that doesn't fail can name his price in April. Halloran knew it. That's why he dug that well so deep. He was a year from being rich when his heart quit on him. She had said, and Mr. Sterrett would prefer to be rich instead. Sterrett's already rich, ma'am. Sterrett wants to be the only one. I have on my desk as I write this a photographic copy of the Lake County Assessor's Plat for 1880. It is the kind of document that historians love and that almost no one else has ever looked at. And it shows the Upper Arkansas bench drawn in surveyor's ink, the section lines ruled straight across country that is not straight at all, and in the middle of the Bar S holdings, which sprawl across the page like spilled tea, there is one small rectangle, 840 acres, that is not shaded with Sterrett's hatching. Someone, the assessor or a clerk, has written across it in a careful hand a single word: Voronova. Not Halloran. The deed had been transferred. The clerks of Lake County, who could not say it and could not spell it, had nonetheless written it down. And writing a thing down, in a country still arguing with itself about who owned what, was the beginning of being real. She had gone west, you understand, not to be rescued and not to be brave. Those are the two stories the frontier likes to tell about women, and both are lies, or rather, both are the kind of half-truth that flatters the teller. She had gone west because in Petersburg, a woman of her name and her ruin had exactly two doors open to her. Marriage to one of her father's creditors, an old man named Brodsky, who held the Wiesbaden note and had let it be known that he would forgive it for her hand. Or the slow, genteel disappearance, the rented rooms growing smaller each year, the sold brooches, the invitations that stopped coming. She had stood at her father's grave in the Wiesbaden cemetery, in the rain, in a borrowed black dress, because her own mourning had been pawned, and she had understood with great clarity that both doors led to the same room, and that the room had no window. So she had taken the third thing, which was not a door at all, but a hole cut in the wall, a country where her name meant nothing, where her ruin meant nothing, where a woman could hold land in her own name. She had read this in a pamphlet, in the reading room of the Hamburg Emigration Office, and had read it 3 times to be sure she understood the English. That in the western states and territories of America, a woman, married or single or widowed, might own and sell and mortgage real property in her own name, sign her own deeds, sue in her own person, and answer to no man's signature but her own. In Russia, a woman could own property too. That surprises people, but it was true. Russian law was in this one respect ahead of England's. And yet, Alexandra had watched her own mother's dowry land be administered her whole life by men who explained the accounts to her once a year, as one explains weather to a child. The pamphlet did not promise her riches. It promised her a signature that meant something. At 33 years old, in a borrowed black dress that had seemed to her worth crossing an ocean for. She had not told Tom Rees any of this. She had told him she had come for the Halloran place and that she meant to keep it, and he had not asked for more. And his not asking had become, over 2 days of foul and filthy labor at the well, the thing she trusted most about him. For he came back. That was the second day's surprise. She had expected him to take his dollar and go, and instead he rode up at first light with a second man, a Cornishman named Trevithick, one of the broken miners who had come for silver and stayed for wages, with forearms like ship's cable and a way of working in total silence. And the 3 of them rigged a tripod of lodgepole over the well and a block and tackle, and they brought the dead steer up in pieces over 2 days. And it was as ugly as he had promised, and worse. and Alexandra Voronova worked the windlass in a pair of Trevithick's spare canvas trousers under her grey skirt, with a kerchief tied over her face, and did not once ask to stop. On the evening of the second day, the well ran clear. Trevithick lowered a lantern on a cord, and they all three looked down and saw it. The water risen back to within 20 feet of the curb, dark and still and clean, with the lantern flame doubled in it. "That's good water," Trevithick said. It was nearly the only thing he had said in 2 days. "Deep, cold water. I've sunk shafts 40 year, missus. That's the best water in this valley, and there isn't a second best." He spat, respectfully, away from the well. Halloran knew where to dig. Tom Rees said nothing, but he looked at the doubled flame in the dark water for a long moment, and Alexandra, watching him and not the water, understood that he was looking at his dead friend's work, the way one looks at a grave that has been tended, and she stepped back from the curb to let him have it alone. And that, the stepping back, the leaving a man his grief without naming it, was the first thing that passed between them that either of them could later have called by a name, though neither did. The romance of the thing, if you want to call it that, and I am not sure the word survives the journey to that well, was not in any look across a room. It was in the windlass. It was in the fact that when her hands tore on the rope on the first day, she wrapped them in strips of her own ruined petticoat and went on turning, and that Tom Rees saw her do it and said nothing, and changed nothing, did not take the handle from her, did not tell her to rest, only adjusted the block so the load came easier and let her keep the work that was hers. In Petersburg, a man who respected a woman protected her from labor. Here, a man who respected a woman let her do the labor and made it possible. She had crossed an ocean, she thought, watching him reset the tackle to learn the difference between those two things. The third day, Pruitt came back early. He came on the 9th day, not the 11th, which told her he had heard about the fire and the unsold deed and the dugout well, which told her in turn that Cornelius Sterrett was a man who paid for information and acted on it quickly, and she revised her estimate of him upward, the way her father had taught her always to revise upward when an opponent moved faster than you had budgeted for. Pruitt rode up with 2 men this time, one of them the young one named Early with the new rifle, and he did not get down from his horse. "Mr. Sterrett," Pruitt said, "is disappointed, ma'am. He made you a fair offer in good faith." He had a paper in his hand. "He's prepared to be more than fair. $1,200. That clears your New York note with 100 to spare and puts you on the eastbound coach, a free woman with no debt in the world. There's not a soul in this valley would call that anything but generous." 1,200. She had paid 11. He had jumped $300 in 9 days. She understood, watching his soft hand hold the paper, that the well was clean, that he knew the well was clean, that the value of the thing she stood on had just been confessed to her by the speed of his arithmetic, and she felt something she had not felt since the English embankment, which was the cold pleasure of holding, for once, the stronger hand. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "when I bought this land in New York, the agent told me it was worth $600, and you told me on the platform it was worth $900, and today you tell me it is worth $1,200. In 9 days, it has doubled. I find I am curious to see what it will be worth in 9 days more. I think I will wait and find out." Early, the young one, laughed before he could stop himself, and Pruitt's face went still and ugly, and the paper crumpled a little in his soft hand. And that was the moment, she would say later, that it stopped being about money for Cornelius Sterrett and became about the thing it is always really about, which is a man who cannot bear to be told no by someone he has decided is beneath him. "You're a long way from home, ma'am," Pruitt said quietly, "and a long way from anybody who'd come looking. I'd think hard on that." He turned his horse.
Then he turned it back.
"Reese," he said, to Tom, who had stood through all of it by the lean-to with a shovel in his hands and had not spoken once. "Sterrett know you're up here? Helping her?" He smiled. "He'll be real interested, after Cimarron and all." And he rode off down the bench with his 2 men, and the words sat in the cold air after he was gone like a struck match. Alexandra looked at Tom Reese. He had gone very still, the stillness she had seen on the stage platform, the stillness of a man holding one thing and watching another. "What is Cimarron?" she said. For a long moment, she thought he would do what he had done before, the thing she trusted, and tell her something true against his own ease. Instead, he set the shovel against the lean-to wall, carefully, as if it might break, and he looked down the empty bench where Pruitt had gone, and he said, "You should know it from me before you hear it from him. But not tonight." He picked up his hat. "There's weather coming. You can see it on the divide. First snow could be 3 days, or it could be tomorrow, and that roof corner won't hold a foot of wet snow." He was already walking to his horse. "I'll bring shakes in the morning, and we'll close it before the storm. Then I'll tell you about Cimarron, and after I tell you, you can decide if you still want my help. Most don't." He mounted and rode down toward the second crossing, and Alexandra Voronova stood alone at the clean well, with the cold coming down off the divide, and the first thin grey cloud already eating the high snow on the peaks. And she understood that she had 2 storms coming now instead of 1, the one in the sky and the one with a name she did not yet know.
And that she would have to learn to read both.
And quickly, because she had 840 acres, a clean well, a clear title, $410, an unpaid note, a man whose past frightened even Sterrett's people. And, she counted it on her fingers in the dark, the way the steward had taught her, not one single friend within 7 miles who could not also, if the price went high enough, become something else.
She went inside
And lit the lamp and took out her father's signet ring and turned it in the light, the Voronov arms worn nearly smooth, and she thought about the word patient and what her father had said about patient men, and she wondered, for the first time, whether she had it in her to be more patient than Cornelius Sterrett, and whether, if patience failed, she had it in her to be something else. Something she had read about in the Hamburg pamphlet, between the lines about deeds and signatures, in the part that explained very plainly that on the western frontier, a woman who owned land was also expected to be able to defend it. The lamp burned. Outside, the first snow of the winter of 1879 began, very lightly, to fall. The snow that began that night was the light kind, the warning kind, and it stopped by morning, and Tom Reese came up the bench at first light with a mule loaded with cedar shakes and a froe and a mallet, and they spent that whole short, cold day on the roof. She handed shakes up to him, and he laid them and nailed them. And they did not talk about Cimarron, and they did not talk about Sterrett, and they worked the way she had once watched serfs work the threshing in Tambov, with the particular wordless rhythm of people racing weather. And by dusk, the broken corner was closed and tight, and the firebox, when she lit it, drew clean and held its heat. He came down off the roof and stood by the stove, warming his torn hands, and she set water to boil, and she made tea, the way she had been taught, properly, with the pot warmed first in a cracked frontier kitchen with the only good china she owned, 2 cups out of her dressing case that had crossed an ocean, and she handed him one, and he held it as if it were an egg, and outside the second snow began, and this one did not stop. Cimarron, he said, looking into the cup. It's a place in New Mexico territory. There was trouble there in 75 and 76. Land trouble. The Maxwell Grant, the biggest land claim in the West, near 1.75 million acres, and a company back east bought it and started throwing settlers off ground they'd farmed for years, saying it was inside the grant. Men got killed over it. A preacher named Tolby got shot dead on the road, and nobody hanged for it. And after that, it came apart into the kind of thing where you couldn't always tell the law from the men the law worked for. He turned the cup. The snow ticked against the window glass. I rode for the company, he said, not knowing at first what the company was, then knowing and riding for it anyway because they paid and I was 27 and a fool. I was there the day they cleared a family named Countess off their place. I didn't pull a trigger. I want to say that and have it be the whole truth. But the whole truth is, I sat my horse with a rifle across the saddle and made it so the Countesses looked at the rifle and went quiet and packed their wagon and left. And a man doesn't need to pull a trigger to be the reason a family loses everything. The rifle does the talking. I learned that at Cimarron. He set the cup down. Sterrett knows because Sterrett was company money in those days before he came up here and got respectable. He knows what I did, and he knows I know what he was. And we have what you might call an understanding to leave each other alone. Helping you breaks the understanding. He'll have known that the minute Early saw my horse at your rail. So, he looked up at her finally, and it cost him. That's Cimarron, ma'am. Most folks, when they hear it, they remember a sudden errand somewhere else. You've a right to do the same. Alexandra Voronova drank her tea. Outside, the snow came down on 840 acres of grass that was hers, over a well of clean water that was hers, against a roof a guilty man had just helped her mend. In 1861, she said, my grandfather freed 3,000 souls who belonged to him. The Tsar's law freed them, but my grandfather did it badly and kept the best land, and the freed peasants got the sand and the marsh and a debt to pay for 49 years for the privilege, and many of them starved, and my grandfather died thinking himself a liberal and a good man. I grew up on the bread that grew on the land he kept. I have never pulled a trigger either, Mr. Reese. It did not make me innocent. She set down her cup. I am not in a position to judge a man for what he did at 27 with a rifle across his saddle. I am in a position to notice what he is doing at— How old are you? 31. At 31, with a fro and a mallet for $1 on the roof of a dead friend's house, for a foreign woman with no protection, against the very man he is afraid of. She stood and took his empty cup. I find I am not sending you on a sudden errand. Drink the rest of the tea. The snow will be deep by morning, and you should not ride the bench in the dark. He stayed the night in the lean-to, with the mule, and that was all, and it was correct. And in the morning, the snow lay 2 feet on the level and higher in the drifts, and the valley was white and silent, and the road to Granite was closed. And they were, the 2 of them, snowed in together on her land for 9 days, during which nothing happened that the strictest Petersburg dowager could have objected to, and during which everything happened. I will not pretend to know what was said in those 9 days. The records, as I have had occasion to say of this whole story, are thin. She kept a diary, and I have read it, and it is maddeningly correct. A list of weather and chores and the depth of snow. The diary of a woman who had learned in a hard school never to write down anything that could be used against her. But there is one entry, for the 4th of the snowed-in days, that reads, in full, T.R. Men's Harness, speaks of Halloran. We do not speak of after. And under it, in the same hand but smaller, as if added later, the only unguarded line in the whole book. I had forgotten that a house could be warm. When the road opened, the trouble came up it. It came in the form of a paper, which was the form Cornelia Sterrett preferred, because Cornelia Sterrett had learned at Cimarron and elsewhere that a paper does what a gun does, but cannot be hanged for it. The paper was served by the Lake County Sheriff, a decent enough man who plainly did not like his errand, and it stated that the late owner of the Halloran place, one Daniel Halloran, had at the time of his death owed the Sterrett Mercantile Company the sum of $480, secured by a lien against the property, recorded, and here was the trap, recorded at the county seat in Leadville in March, after Halloran's death and before the deed was sold to a New York agent, which meant, if it was good, that the lien rode with the land, that she had bought 840 acres and a debt, and that the debt fell due, with interest, on the 1st of December, 11 days away, and that if she could not pay $480 and the costs, the Sterrett Mercantile Company would foreclose and take the land, and the well, at law, in daylight, with the sheriff's own signature on the deed. She had $410 in the world. "It's forged," Tom Reese said flatly, reading it over her shoulder at the kitchen table. Halloran didn't owe Sterrett a dime. He hated Sterrett. He'd no more sign a lien to Sterrett's store than— "It does not matter whether it is forged," Alexandra said. She was reading it for the 3rd time, slowly, the way she read everything in English, and she had gone very calm, the calm her mother had called her counting face. It matters whether the recording is good. A forged signature recorded in March, when there was no one to dispute it because Halloran was dead and the land stood empty, against a buyer in New York who never saw the county records. She looked up. This is well done. This is patient. He did not sit on his offers because he was confident I would sell. He sat on them because he had already filed this in March, before I ever bought the deed, before he had ever heard my name. The lien was waiting in the courthouse the whole time. He was always going to win this. The offers were a kindness to himself. So he would not have to use the paper and could simply buy what was already his. She set the document down very precisely, squaring its edge to the edge of the table. My father bought a forest once by first buying the only sawmill. Mr. Sterrett has bought my land by first buying the only courthouse. It is the same move. I have seen it before. Then you know there's no winning it. He's got the recording. He's got the date. He has the recording, she agreed. He does not have the recording correct. She had noticed it on the 2nd reading and confirmed it on the 3rd, and she explained it to Tom Reese in the cracked kitchen with the lamp lit, in her slow, correct, accented English, and it was the thing she had crossed an ocean to be able to do, which was to hold a paper in her own name and find the flaw in it, with no man standing between her and the law. The lien recited that Daniel Halloran had executed it on the 14th of March, 1879. But Daniel Halloran, Tom had told her at the well on the first day, in the instruction he had given her without knowing he was arming her, Daniel Halloran had died in February. His heart quit on him, Tom had said, a year from being rich. A dead man on the 14th of March cannot sign a lien on the 14th of March. The forger had been careless with the one fact he could not control, which was the date of the death of the man whose hand he had faked. And the death was a matter of record, too, in the same courthouse, in the coroner's book, where the law of Colorado required a death to be entered, and where Cornelius Sterrett, who had remembered to forge the lien, had forgotten to unrecord the death. "You're certain he died in February," she said. "It must be certain. Everything turns on it." "I dug the grave," Tom Reese said. "Ground was froze. Took me and Trevidick 2 days. It was February. I can swear the day." "Then we do not need to prove the lien is forged," Alexandra said. "That would be my word and your word against a recorded document, and we would lose. We need only prove that the man who signed it was already in the ground when he signed it. That is not opinion. That is 2 entries in the same book, in the same hand of the same clerk, 11 days apart, the death and the signature, and the death comes first. A territory will forgive a great deal, but it cannot, in open court, let a corpse sign a contract, not with the coroner's own book on the table." She allowed herself the small, dry pleasure again. He was patient. He was only patient with the wrong fact. The foreclosure could not proceed without a hearing, because she filed, herself, in her own hand, riding into Leadville through the snow on a hired horse, with Tom Reese beside her and Trevidick behind, past the Opera House and the deep mud of Harrison Avenue and the 10,000 silver-mad souls, a sworn objection, in proper legal English, she had drafted at the kitchen table from a borrowed copy of the Colorado statutes, asserting that the recorded lien was void on its face because it bore an execution date subsequent to the recorded death of the purported maker, and praying the court to examine its own coroner's record before permitting the sheriff to act. I have read the objection. It is in the Lake County Archive, 4 pages in a small, upright hand, in English that is just slightly too formal, the English of a woman who learned it from books and never quite trusted her ear, and at the bottom it is signed, in a hand grown suddenly larger and surer, Alexandra Voronova, and below that, where the form asked for the name of the attorney of record, she had written, and I have stood in the archive and read it, and it is the best line in the whole document. The petitioner appears for herself. The hearing took less than an hour. The judge, a territorial appointee named Updegraff, who had read law in Ohio and come west for his lungs and his fortune in that order, sent a clerk for the coroner's book before he would hear argument, which told everyone in the room which way the thing would go, and when the clerk laid the book open on the bench and the judge read the death entry for Daniel Halloran, dated the 19th of February, and then read the lien dated the 14th of March, he looked up over his spectacles at Cornelius Sterrett, who had come himself, in a good coat, expecting to watch a foreign woman cry. And he said, in the dry voice of a man who has just been handed a reason to do the thing he wanted to do anyway, that the court was not in the habit of enforcing contracts executed by deceased persons, and that the recorded lien was a nullity, and that the petitioner, who appears, I see, for herself, and appears to have done a better job of it than counsel I have heard at this bar, held clear title, and that he would entertain at the proper time any action she cared to bring regarding the manner in which a dead man's signature had come to be recorded in his county. That last sentence was the only shot fired in the whole war, and Alexandra Voronova fired it, and it went into Cornelius Sterrett and did not come out, because everyone in that courtroom, and by nightfall, everyone in Leadville, and by the spring, everyone in the valley, understood that the judge had just invited the Russian woman to prosecute Sterrett for forgery, and that she could, and that the only reason she did not have to was that the threat of it now sat in her pocket for the rest of his life. A loaded thing she need never fire, because its weight was enough. She kept the revolver, too.
I should say that
Because it is true, and because the channel that tells you these stories would be lying by omission if it left it out. On the ride back from Leadville, Tom Reese stopped at the Mercantile, not Sterrett's, and bought, with his own dollar, a Smith & Wesson Schofield, top break, because the latch was easy and the cases ejected all at once, and he taught her to load it and to fire it at a fence post on the East Bench in the last week before the deep snow closed everything. And she was not good at it and never became good at it. But she became good enough, and the revolver hung by the door of the log house for 30 years, and she never once fired it at a man. And the not having to was the whole of the victory, the same as with the forgery, and she knew it, and that knowledge, that the deepest power was the power one need not use, was the dowry her ruined country had given her, and the only thing of value she had carried across the sea. The romance, since you have stayed this long and are owed it, was as follows, and it was enough. In April, when the snow went off the bench and the grass came back green over the well, Cornelius Sterrett, who had given up on the land, but not on his dignity, sent Pruitt one last time to offer, now, fairly, the true price.